Watching you. Good. Hello, everyone. I'd like to share some reflections on the mind in relationship to mindfulness in yoga. So we consider the term mindfulness perhaps somewhat generically, right? Like it's this universal thing that we can, a perspective we can paint onto everything that we do, which is just fundamentally to be wholly and fully and as much as possible aware of whatever it is we're doing, whether it's walking or meditating or being in relationship to people. And there's, we could tease that apart a bit more, like what's actually going on in your mind. And of course, neuroscience has its own take or map as to what's actually going on in your mind in very elaborate detail. Right? This is the region of your brain where you detect smell, and this is how a cascade of events happen and mapped out specifically neurological when you think about the past, and here's where memory lives, etc. And the yogic model, and there's other ones, but the most basic yoga model divides the mind essentially into 4 parts. So from 1 trillion neurons, we've gone down to 4 parts. So this is, you could fit this in your glove box as far as maps go. And there's some variation in how these maps get put together. It's largely, though this pattern, this model or this map I want to share with you shows up in throughout different texts. So Bhagavad Gita makes reference to it. Yoga Sutras certainly make reference to it. And Samkhya Yoga, which is, as I understand it, kind of the progenitor of this map, certainly makes reference to it. And I'll share the screen here. We have a view of all the components of our mind. Share screen. Thank you button. Good. So this is, let's see how I'll blow this up. Good. So these are the 4 parts, and we'll go through them one by one. The first is Hamkara, or what we commonly call ego. So this is just simply the notion of I, which is a dominant point of reference, right? More often than not, when we consider what we're doing with our day and how we should orient and what our priorities are and likes and dislikes, it all hinges on this notion of I. So I is a central feature in our existence, so much so that we pretty much take it for granted. That we just assume that there's, my particular world and view and likes, and that it's all very real and central, right? There's me over here, and then there's kind of the rest of this world doing its other thing, and I'm the primary director and the lead cast and the producer and the filmmaker of this whole production called life, and I'm the lead character and all that. That's the I, what's literally called the I sense, or what we call in Latin ego, which you peel back, go back to the original etymology, just simply means I, right? Though we tend to associate ego with, good ego or bad ego or big ego or small ego and so forth. In its purest sense, it's just the notion of I. It's the raw Christmas tree on which we hang all the ornaments of our existence and preferences and so forth. Uh, then we have what's called chitta, which is, again, here's where we kind of depart from uh, there's other models and presentations, and chitta sometimes is categorized as like a memory bank or your kind of historic reservoir from which we derive or draw our identity. So if ahamkara is I, chitta is all the memories and so forth that reinforce that sense of I. So experiences in childhood that inform our view now, whether those were positive or negative, there's a whole industry built around unpacking events that occurred in childhood that may have a kind of like an anchor, like a lingering effect from the past. That's called therapy, right? Well, there's various models and modes for therapy, but that seems to be a common theme in many of them, right? So the memory bank of past experience informs our present notion of I, right? And then into the right and to the left, we'll start with the lower mind, which is manas, which is the aspect of your mind that's responsible for sense. It has a few functions, but sense assimilation. So right now you're hearing my voice and you see the screen, and I don't know what taste is doing for you right now, but you could feel your body on the earth if you directed your attention that way, or chair, or wherever you're sitting. Right. The faculty that draws all that together and presents it as a cohesive experience for most people is manas. Right. It's quite amazing, right? All that happens like in an instant. All this data comes in through the senses and is assembled into, again, for most people, a coherent impression that makes it appear as though all that stuff, like what you're seeing, is happening out there, when in fact that experience on the most basic level is happening inside of your mind, right? So we all the sense impression gets put together and gives us that impression, as though it were happening outside, but in fact that perception is occurring inside, and as such it's not entirely objective, right? It's colored by chitta or memory banks. Two people see a car, one of them says it's aubergine, one says it's red, one says it's sienna, right? We have different impressions, in part based on our conditioning, our chitta, or memory banks, or what the ego would like to see. It's also the aspect of our mind that keeps us safe. So were there a loud noise right now, a pot were to drop in the kitchen, or you smelled smoke, and there was some reflexive response, that would be manas too. So your lower mind, or your reptilian brainstem, or your amygdala system. Amygdala is kind of a borderland between manas and buddhi. Those would be examples of manas. It's designed to keep you safe. Your reactive mind, your sympathetic nervous system, right? When you have a sympathetic response, there's a perceived threat, and the body goes into fight or flight. That would be also a function of manas. And then we have which shares a relationship with buddhi. Now, buddhi is your higher mind, or your mind of discernment, even wisdom, right? It's the ability to pull back and view objectively. So someone might say something that appears kind of slighting, and the buddhi can put on the brakes before we get reactive, say with more manasahamkara, and say, well, you know what, maybe that person was having a bad day, or maybe I interpreted that wrong, or maybe I'm, interpreting it based on my, childhood wounding or chitta, or, what's a better way that I could see this? Two people lose the same job. One says it's the end of the world. One says it's a new opportunity. These are all the way Buddhi can frame our experience. You might think of it as the context maker. It's the frame, like a picture frame, we can place around experience that accents or highlights certain aspects of it. If you look at a picture in the, or what do they call that, the border that goes around it, like they get the mat and it's like purple or it's blue or it's yellow, and it in some ways seems it's like an add-on to the actual piece of art, or if you had a watercolor or something like that, and watercolor of the tropics, and then you put this border around it, some color that you get to pick. You're not the artist, but the original artist, but you get to be that part artist that frames the picture. So if you go with the yellow border or mat, the whole picture is gonna feel very different than if you went with the blue, than if you went with the green. And some of them, are kind of clashing. Like you could indeed like ruin the piece of art based on the kind of border or mat that we choose to put around things. Okay, so that's buddhi. And all this occurs instantaneously, simultaneously. And in application, this could look like just being able to tease these parts of your own experience. So recognize your own ahamkara more and more, and recognize how your ahamkara may be informed by the past or your memory banks, how you're maybe reactive at times, or how you can draw upon your intellect. Yoga in many ways is the cultivation of buddhi, or more specifically sattvic buddhi. This is more than we'll get into at this moment. Sense impressions may be of note, and Purusha's the source of all awareness, that's from which the mind is drawing. The mind is your mind is something like a antenna or receiver in the field of infinite consciousness or intelligence. So we're not as autonomous as we may think, but rather the mind is borrowing its light, or the light of intelligence, from a universal source, the same way that we might, like if you have a crystal, that you hang up in the window, and the light of the sun comes through and hits the crystal, and all these little rainbows and everything come out, and it looks pretty amazing. Like, oh wow, look at all these rainbows I made, the rainbows of your thoughts. However, the crystal is not the source of those rainbows. Rather, the sun is, or our metaphorical. The sun is our metaphorical Purusha, or the source of all awareness. And so, the enlightenment, or the deep realization, so forth, is a gradual purification of the mind structure, such that the light of Purusha, or pure awareness, shines through the system undistorted, unperturbed in any sort of way, and we can realize the deeper nature of truth or reality, which inherently has many positive qualities, such as infinite love or peace. So that's the kind of mindscape's relationship to the universal ideals of yoga and spiritual development, approaching Purusha. Yeah. So that's a simple take. Yoga psychology knuckled down quite a bit. All right, peace, people. We'll transition now.